Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month. Reggae dancehall by the beach. At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
Use them, it's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like Malcolm. 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ, or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday, or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448, or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, doublets, and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
Sunday, May 27, 2018, GDS Entertainment proudly presents
Grooving on the Hudson.
That's right, Grooving on the Hudson. Memorial Weekend celebration. Music played by Road International. Selector Oxtail alongside King Shiloh International. All aboard the elegant Paddle Wheel Queens, One World's Fair Marina. Boarding 6 p.m. sharp from Flushing Queens Certified Shea Stadium. And Miss Marina will be selling 7 p.m. sharp. Also,
For tickets, People's Choice Furniture, Bronx, New York. Doris Restaurant, Queens, New York. G's Restaurant, Queens, New York.
Also,
WorldJamGlobal.com.
Also, complimentary dinner prize and surprises.
Come party with us.
Just think it's slow. Sailing on the summer breeze.
Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. In the day, I didn't really care.
Well, I want to say big good evening going out to each and every single one of you this evening.
Do or die, I had.
My name is Kevin Julian, and you're in tune to another Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
There was not a man I couldn't beat.
We do have an absolutely outstanding show lined up for you today.
And women,
Alton Sterling's Life Mattered.
Getting money, life is so sweet. Nothing's have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about beating no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
My guest today,
I paid for my crime.
Pastor Greg Greer, advocate
I paid for my crime.
and public speaker.
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent, I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chum. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
This really is the only worldwide talk show that's going on all across the world, dealing with issues around police brutality, unlawful convictions, wrongful convictions, unlawful killings.
My time, pay for my crime. Already did my time.
And issues relating to our basic human rights.
My time, pay for my
We've been running for over 3 years now.
My time.
And I'm glad to say we're still on the case.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide.
Remember, this is not a music show, this is a talk show.
Very quick on my feet.
And I'm going to be talking to Pastor Greg Greer.
I was getting money, life is so sweet. Now things have changed, the whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man, don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster, life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this.
So no matter what part of the world you are, kick back.
I paid for my crime. Already
get yourself relaxed.
For my crime.
Get yourself a nice cup of tea, coffee.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did.
And we're going to tell you about a story that will truly astound you.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
For those of you that are not familiar with the case of Alton Sterling, this is a young man that used to sell CDs on the street corner.
I got my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit.
And after an anonymous phone call,
over since I've gotten older, the life I used to live.
Something I remember.
I was young.
John Crawford Sr. telling us,
real Forrest Gump
represented, I think, what they call out there in America, swatting. That's where people call out and say that there's a black man waving a gun in the street.
I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters. Already did my time. Paid for my crime.
Another young man.
My time.
Another young black man.
My time.
Lay dead in the street.
Already did my time.
We're going to be talking about the matters pertaining to that and the subsequent investigation thereafter. So please stand by for my guest, the Honourable Pastor Greg Greer, advocate, public speaker. This is going out around the world. Shout outs to Wally Bent, Lloyd Bogle, I see you guys, Shell Stevens, Janet Lewis. Thank you for your continued encouragement and support.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Stand by, we're going live in about 2 minutes.
Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pay for my crown, pay for my crown, pay for my crown, pay for my crown. Pay for my crown. All those drive-by killings, stop them. It ain't about nothing. He who was out sin, let him cast the first stone. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like a...
Just as these deaths continue to rise across the capital, the United States of America,
worldwide,
Alton Sterling's case is still outstanding,
each other.
And his family are still seeking justice.
Yeah.
So is the community. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my guest, the Honourable Pastor Greg Greer. How are we doing, Pastor Greg Greer?
Kervin, how are you? Welcome, and I thank you for welcoming me on the show.
It's always an honour to have you on, and we've always got a lot to talk about when you do come, so it's a privilege, and the privilege is ours. Thank you for your time and the hard work that you do around Chicago in particular, and the rest, especially for the black folks of the United States of America. It's great work. But today we are looking to talk about the case of Alton Sterling, a young man who was in the prime of his life. No angel by all accounts, but very much a young man with a lot of potential ahead of him. And yet, at that particular time of his life, he was selling CDs. And no, here's the thing, Greg. As I considered that case out in St. Lucia, as you know, I come from St. Lucia, and I go out there quite often. And in fact, I'm due to go out there again next month in June. Flights already booked. But out there in St. Lucia, we have a guy who we call Mr. CD, and he parks up just outside one of the shopping malls, and that's been his pitch for as many years as I can remember. He's there every day, apart from Sunday, Monday to Saturday. And you can go to this guy and you can get whatever you like. You can go and ask him for all different types of music from all parts of the world. And sometimes you can even just go to him and ask him for a particular brand of music or give him a list of tracks, and he'll put them together and tell you to come back in a week, and he'll have them ready before your holiday is over, you know, that you can take away with you. And I was thinking about Alton. And I was thinking about Mr. CD because I don't really know his real name. I just know him as Mr. CD. That's what everybody calls him. You go out on holiday and he's Mr. CD. But I'm just wondering if we had the same sort of laws that out in St. Lucia as you have out there in America, if we had the same sort of mentality where somebody could just call the police and say that there's a guy waving a gun, and they did that to our Mr. CD, and you know, moments later he was laying dead on the floor, I think some people would call it a national tragedy. So I'm not aware of Alton and his standing in the community or anything else. But all I do know is that Mr. CD provided a real service in that community for those who wanted access to various types of music from around the world that weren't accessible. But Alton Sterling, to me, in his community was no different. That's what he did, right? He sold CDs.
Yes. He was known locally as the CD man in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That is correct.
Well, there you go. You know, again, as I said, we called our guy Mr. CD. He was CD man, a very similar role that he played. Now, I just want to reconnect with the beginning of this tragedy, so that our listeners, our new audience, and those that are not aware of how Alton died and the circumstances surrounding the death. So maybe you could just take us through some of that and explain to us the circumstances as you know it, Greg.
So yeah, no problem, Kervin. So on July 5th of 2016, as we had stated, that Alton was the local CD man and known to a lot of the locals around and very friendly, had a very good presence. He was allowed to be a CD vendor in one of the local stores, the Triple S Food Mart over in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And basically, he had a good relationship with the store's management team and a lot of the customers. And people knew to go to Alton at the Triple S and they could get movies and CDs and, you know, a lot of other things that they needed as far as just products that Alton would normally be known to sell. So it really was never a real issue until the unfortunate night of July 5th of 2016, when basically Alton was detained by two Baton Rouge police officers. And this came after an anonymous caller. A man was threatening and waving a handgun at Alton while he was in the process of selling his CDs. The officers came and, you know, according to a lot of the witnesses on the scene, Kervin, basically they did not come with the officer-friendly mentality, but they came with some of the forcefulness that we've seen in a lot of these miscarriages of justice cases when it comes to police brutality. The officers tased Alton Sterling, and basically they said that he was resisting. They tased him several times and then forced Alton to the hood of a sedan and then to the ground. And as I think you showed a visual of the two officers who were standing over Alton, or excuse me, on the ground, and they were wrestling Alton, but they pinned Alton to the ground, both of the officers, one kneeling on his chest, the other on his thigh, and they were trying to control his hands. This was on July 5th, again, of 2016. One officer was saying that, hey, he's got a gun, yelling very loudly. And he said, and I quote you, "If you effing move, I swear to God." He didn't say effing, he said the actual word, "I swear to God." And then basically the other officer, and the second officer was named Salamoni. He said that basically Salamoni said, "I swear to God." And what we heard later on was that he said, "I will shoot you in the head." The second officer, the officer's name is Officer Lake, said he's got a gun. And then one of the officers aimed the shots at Sterling's body. 3 shots were heard at that point in time. Now, this was being filmed by a witness who was in the area, but the camera panned back and forth and that sort of thing. But when it pointed back to Sterling, this first visual, which was a bystander's filming on a cell phone, it showed that Sterling had a gunshot in his chest. And what happened at that point in time is the officers loaded a 38 caliber revolver. They retrieved a 38 caliber revolver at that point in time. But the film showed that Alton had multiple gunshots to the chest. And unfortunately, right shortly thereafter that evening, roughly around 12:35 a.m., Alton succumbed to the multiple gunshots to his chest and his back. At the end of that, the multiple bystanders who were standing around captured the video of the shooting, as well as the stored surveillance cameras, and some of the video was captured on the officers' body cameras as well. A lot of public disdain and protests came shortly thereafter, because what everyone said was this was a miscarriage of justice, and that's when the fight begun, and it has begun. And unfortunately, Alton did not live to see basically the next moment after that incident, and we've been fighting on the ground ever since.
You know, this swatting, as they call it, is very similar to how John Crawford was killed, or how the police was called to him. I remember there was a live footage, and I remember when we featured that particular show, they ran the footage of the 911 call alongside the CCTV of what was actually taking place in the store while John Crawford was in the shopping aisle. And while that guy was on the phone to the police saying that there was a guy waving a gun, and, oh, look, he just waved it at a mother and a child that had just walked past, none of that was evidenced by the shop CCTV. You would have thought that the police would have learnt their lesson with this swatting procedure that's been taking place for many years now. It's nothing new, is it?
No. And what's happening is it almost seems to be getting worse. Of course, we've been fighting on the ground, and we know these cases, they have become infamous as well as notorious when it comes to police brutality and police murder. And we know the names: Tamir Rice, Alton Sterling, the Crawford case, John Crawford III. We know these cases, and we've seen them. And I'll tell you what, it just doesn't seem to be slowing down. And the American public has grown frustrated to the extent to whereas, we really are wanting something to be done more than what we've seen. And unfortunately, we don't see the end of public sanctions against these officers. In most cases, these officers are not even prosecuted, Kervin.
And it's a sad case, because not only are they not prosecuted, but the investigations are thwarted from the very get-go. Information availability and even the family are stifled in all of their attempts to get information as to how their loved one perished or lost their life and the circumstances. And the police even go one step further because they then try to totally criminalize and de-character that individual in order to justify their kill.
Sure. And again, we've seen these cases, Philandro Castillo. I mean, the names go on. And I tell you what, it is a sad and tragic similarity in all of these cases. And here's the more troubling part, the more deeper troubling part is that the U.S. Department of Justice investigations prior to President Trump coming aboard or coming into office, I should say, the U.S. Department of Justice was looking into a lot of these particular incidents of miscarriages of justice. But I can tell you that their track record for resolving these has been sadly tragic, little to nothing. We haven't seen results. We haven't seen change. And as you very well know, Kervin, I have fought on the ground with a lot of these families. And again, we are looking for change. Sure, there has been civil litigations in quite a few of the cases, even Tamir's case, sadly not in Alton's case. But we need prosecutions of the police officers involved, especially when they are in the wrong and there's a serious, clear path of miscarriage of justice.
Absolutely. So have you had any opportunity to speak to any of Alton's family members since his passing?
Yeah, so how I got involved and how Freedom First International, the organization that I represent, and our officers got involved, our executive team, we actually started talking to the auntie of Alton, Sandra Sterling, 2 days after the incident. And it might have even been 1 day after the incident, but within the first 48 hours of Alton's death, we were on the phone with the family. And the reason why we offered our assistance, be it Freedom First International, is because we were fresh off of the Tamir Rice case in Cleveland, Ohio. And that was a case of a young man, young preteen who was shot by the two Cleveland police officers. So we understood the logistics of what needed to be done. We understood and we offered our services. And from that point on, we pretty much were watching the results of the case. And we stood by the family and offered support up until the point of going down and actually participating with ground efforts. But yes, we had been in contact with the family and we still are in contact with family members.
Okay, and in the conversations that you've had with the family members, have you been able to get a better picture of the type of person that Alton Sterling was growing up in that particular community?
Well, and we don't, here's what I want to be very clear about. In Alton's case, Alton was pretty much raised by a grandmother. He wasn't raised by his immediate mother and father. He grew up in a family home, is what we were told. And, he had a lot of, you did mention that he was not as far as character-wise, he had a troubled past. He had some things that were within his history. Other than that, small minor things. He had spent some time he was incarcerated. So we had heard various stories, but nothing to the point of serious issues. There are some serious allegations that are floating around, but me personally and my organization, Freedom First International, we hadn't substantiated anything, neither on the reports of a serious criminal history. So for the most part, what we know of at this point was his character was he was the local guy who had been in some trouble and he was trying to turn his life around. Okay,
now going back to that particular day, there was a phone call made by an anonymous person who claimed that there was a guy waving a gun around. Now, there is evidence from bystanders and the storekeeper where he rented the space from that contradict the version of events as the police have alleged it to be, right?
Yes, it is. There's a few different allegations as far as the person who made the call. One allegation was that this particular person was a homeless person who asked Alton for some money. Alton said, well, I don't have any money. The homeless man was insistent upon receiving some kind of support from Alton, be it money, and basically because he had a stand with this product, his CDs and that sort of thing. Alton urged the gentleman to go away. According to the other witness, the story was verified that the man wouldn't go away. So Alton pretty much showed him the butt of a gun, saying that if you don't leave me alone, look at this. And at that point in time, then the man, homeless or what have you, went and called the police, and that's the allegation that we've heard consistently.
So it was the annoying individual who was trying to tap Alton for some money, who was shooed away, and when he refused to leave, Alton became a bit more assertive with his intention for him to leave, and with that, this gentleman went away and called. Has there ever been a transcript of the 911 call made by this individual to ascertain the intent and seriousness of the circumstances as alleged by the police?
Well, in the aftermath of the investigation, there's been a flurry of information that has come out, even videos. I can't vouch for the 911 tape of the calling, but I do believe that there is one, but I don't know if it's been made public at this time.
Okay, so according to the shopkeepers, and some other bystanders, Alton was not the one causing the trouble. Is that correct?
That is correct. Now, keep in mind, one of the shopkeeper is actually one of the ones who stood there and filmed the shooting of Alton. And also, not only did he film it, he filmed it on his cell phone, but there was a CCTV video cam footage from the Triple S Food Mart of the shooting as well. And according to the shopkeeper who was there from the very beginning of the conflict with the situation leading to the shooting, he said, look, Alton didn't do anything wrong, and I'm going to vouch for Alton. And this particular gentleman actually stayed all the way through to talk to the police officers, even when the police officers had suggested that he give them the videotape camera footage. The gentleman refused to give them the videotape camera footage, and there was a lot of flurry about that. The shopkeeper should have been commended because he did not give up that videotape camera footage, but a lot of the videotape camera, two cell phone pieces instantly went out around the world with the shooting, and his footage was one.
Wow. Again, modern technology, the social media, smartphones has really leveled the playing field once again, and that going out in advance really got the truth out there quicker than the lie the police were going to tell in their investigations that were to follow, and they are still trying to justify that they were right. Now, when you think about it, the police, knowing that Alton had form, because they would have known him, they would have known of him. They would have known of his existence, selling CDs where he was, and they would have also been aware of his past history. Do you think, in your opinion, a different approach could have been ministered than the one that led to his death?
Well, here's the sad reality, Curvin, about being black or minority or even poor in America, what happens is one of our top three biggest gripes is the amount and the level of service when it comes to police officers and their interaction. We see routinely that when police officers approach people, their interaction is punitive rather than restorative, meaning that they don't approach being officer friendly, if you understand what I'm saying. It's always a punitive, rough them up, mean mug. I want to show you who's in authority. And this yields the type of results that we're seeing, which leads to confusion. A lot of time it's leading to fatalities. And this is the problem that we're asking, because we need officer friendly to come back and serve and protect. Is the mandate, and a lot of these police officers are trained from the academy to serve and protect. So we're not seeing that ethic when it comes to the handling of folks in the community.
So I suppose one of the biggest failings of the police force in issues like this is the absence of de-escalation.
That is so correct. De-escalation is very important. And you are speaking to somebody who is trained as a criminal justice specialist. And I can tell you, it should be restorative. There has been a move for restorative justice to take place, meaning to bring a balance back to the community, which is what these officers should be doing. But we haven't seen that factor in a lot of these cases. Not even just the known cases, Kervin, but even the cases that don't make national news. We know that when we get stopped by a police officer, 99.5% of the time, you know what? Let me be fair. I would say 85% of the time, they result in a punitive interaction to whereas we feel mistreated, misaligned, and punished.
Yeah. And when we see some of the bigger high-profile cases that takes place in America where there are non-blacks involved, there seems to be a better and a safer outcome for the suspect. And he's arrested. We've had multiple incidents where there's been massacres and mass murders at schools and places like that. And the individual is threatening all sorts of stuff, and there's people's lives at risk, and these the individuals are still armed, but yet they're apprehended safely.
Sure, and you can drill that down to the economics factor. In wealthier areas, you don't see these types of interactions so much as you do, and we understand that because some of the rougher neighborhoods, the tough neighborhoods, there is a different approach that's necessary. But again, we ask that the officers maintain a figure of restraint as much as possible, and we don't see that that's happening, Kervin.
So how much discussion, how much conversation, how much action is being led towards police retraining in the art of de-escalation? Because that's got to be a paramount key.
Well, I can guarantee you that if there was some movement as a result of 2016, when in November of 2016, when President Donald J. Trump was elected, and he put Jeff Sessions in charge of the U.S. Department of Justice, their stance has been immediately that we are pro-police. We will not prosecute police officers, and I can say that President Trump even said to a graduating police academy that if you see gangbangers, beat the hell out of them. Those were his exact words, end quote.
We've witnessed across the world the various statements made by the delusional Donald Trump, who unfortunately happens to be your president and one of the most powerful men on the planet. And I'm absolutely gobsmacked and dumbfounded as to how he managed to work his way up to be a representative, let alone a candidate, even more so, actually win an election to become president of the United States of America. And sometimes I think, is it just a punishment a backlash by the white folk of America who said, "How dare you put a black man, Obama, in the White House? We're going to make sure that never happens again," or whatever. We're gonna. I don't know. All the ideologies and all the opinions don't matter much. What does matter is that there are innocent young men who are still losing their lives on the streets. When we see up in Canada, for example, of great examples of police officers, cops, who are talking people down, who are armed and pointing weapons at them. But yet these officers still move in and and de-escalate the situation and take away the individual, right? In full view of all these cameras, etc. But this guy is then able to stand before a court of law and answer to the charges that are put against him fairly.
Yeah, well, Kervin, to your point, what's happening is because of the nationwide tension, and I could even say it surpasses nationwide tension because of the international tension over race and policing. We see these events, and these events are being highlighted all over the country. And what's happening is here's an example of what's happening. On July 17th, the same year, and shortly after Alton was shot, there was a gentleman, and if you can notate his name was Galvin Eugene Long. He, in retaliation, shot and killed 3 police officers and wounded several others in Baton Rouge, the same city where Alton was shot. He was killed at the scene, and the shooting was linked to the nationwide tension over race and policing. And we saw a similar incident in Dallas, Texas, to whereas a gentleman shot and killed multiple police officers. Because here's the thing, Kervin, and what I've always said in my speeches, I don't justify murder of anyone, but if the people are not given justice, then I'm going to guarantee you they will find their own justice.
Absolutely. Now, when we talk about someone like President Trump, who is lorded over this particular period of time, and as you said, has made the statement that officers will not be prosecuted, right? As a minister, as a pastor, does it not sadden you that that the church did not respond to the potential rise of the white supremacist of Donald Trump and his followers as he was? And in fact, there are several photographs, videos, and news stories of black Pentecostal church leaders coming alongside Donald Trump, siding with him in his run-up to the election. As a minister, does it not sadden you that the church has not played a greater role in the community in challenging these injustices? And I'm not talking about you in particular, because we know that you're a champion for the fight in the community, but does it not sadden you that the church as a whole has not unified itself in challenging these injustices?
Well, yes, the evangelistic community around the country has a lot of answering to do. It needs to take authority, and it needs to step up its efforts. And there is a lack when it comes to liberation. And even from a theological standpoint, I am a liberation theologist. Dr. King was a liberation theologist in its purest sense. A lot of the civil rights leaders who were pastors and ministers during the civil rights era of the 60s were liberation theologists. We need to look at the mandate, we need to look at the mission, and we need to get back to where it was, because we have been lacking even to date. It's not the way it was, and it needs to get back, because if it did, Kervin, it would help out tremendously. If people understood that the church would bring their voice into the matter in a flurry, we would see instantly overnight a lot of these cases could be minimized through public information, through education, and just through accountability.
Because the church in days gone by had a massive role to play in the community and how the community was managed. And in fact, the church was the first point of contact for local community law enforcement officers when they were seeking to get involved in an issue that was highly potentially dangerous in a community.
Well, that's right. You know, the institutional and structural racism was a lot of times, even going back to the slave days, was very much the church was the rallying factor for the community. The church was the education factor when there wasn't anything else. We could go to the church. The African American people can go to the church. The oppressed people can go into the church, and they were protected. Even to this day, you know, some of the immigrants, being the Latinos and everyone else who are being oppressed by this particular president and his government, they know that they can go to a lot of churches for safe haven. You know, you understand?
Absolutely. So therefore, you know, there are, you know, Black Lives Matter and all these other groups that are rallying around to, post. I was talking to Yolanda McNair and Donna Hayes recently, and these are all people that are heading up groups in different parts of America to support people who are going through some of these very difficult times. And so you've got to ask yourself, where is the church in the middle of all of these tragedies? Where is the church in the middle of this dilemma? Where is the church in the middle of these discussions? And where is the church in the middle of all of this trauma? Where is the church?
Yeah. And you know, subsequently, Kervin, you know, and we don't want to put it all on the church's lap, but we know that there is a lack of clarity for the positioning of the church, and we need that clarity to come forward, and we need the church to be a voice in these matters. And if they did, again, it would be a help. Even though these issues are several layers deep, I mean, you know, we can leave the church and say, where's the leadership? Where's the civic leadership? Where's the political leadership with these instances? What are you doing? Why are we still seeing these cases? When are you going to go back and federally look at a lot of these? And remember, these shootings, Kervin, of these young men are not municipal cases, because when it's a murder involved, it becomes instantly a federal case. So there's jurisdiction for the United States of America to mandate how they approach these investigations, but they haven't done so. Not under President Obama, and definitely it won't happen under Donald J. Trump.
That's very true. And the one thing that you can clearly witness in America is how the Muslim faith has really grown with the aggressive stance that they take to brutality and law enforcement and etc. And I'm not saying that the church should take as an equal stance in that, but I think that they need to be equally represented, because at the minute, until the word of God as we know it comes into the equation, we're not going to get no peace or satisfaction. There's going to be no justice. So at the minute, the community who used to be able to rely on the church as a spokesperson, right? That was their first go-to point in times of trouble. That doesn't seem to be existing anymore, Greg. That's from our perspective, seen from this side of the water.
Right, and thank God for civic organizations, which is the next layer of fallout. If you know, if organizations like the ACLU, you know, we can say Black Lives Matters has given the voice and protest to hundreds and thousands of people. Alicia Garza, who is a personal associate and friend of mine, I can say that, you know, we thank God for them, because here's the thing. What they've actually done is they have actually given a way for people who are frustrated with these problems and these issues of police brutality and killings and governmental oppression to have a voice. And guess what? Minus these particular institutions, even my organization, Freedom First, minus those types of institutions, I can guarantee what it would become is it would become a level of danger for not only the community, but police officers, because more officers would lose their lives. As you remember, the last thing I want to say about this piece is, if the people do not find justice, if you haven't given these people justice, then they're going to take it upon themselves to find justice.
Absolutely, and I agree with you 100%. If it wasn't for the likes of some of these civil groups, we would have absolute mayhem out on the streets. There'd be no order. There'd be no coordination. It'd be absolutely nothing to rely on. It would be war. So yes, I agree with you 100%. I was just trying to make the point that the church really does need to step up and be one of those voices that are equally heard. So I don't want to. I'm not putting the blame on the church. I just feel in this country we have a very similar issue, not with police violence or such, but just in the silencing of the church. So many things that the church have been silenced on, that it's not recognized, it's not seen as the first and foremost voice that people listen to or hear anymore. And because of that, there is a lot of dissatisfaction in the church as such. So therefore, people can quite easily attach themselves to different types of organizations and new types of faiths and different types of faiths that take them away from the purpose and the will of God, in my opinion, my humble opinion. I just like to see the church rise up and start being the voice that it needs to be for the people, because that's what God put us there for, is for each other, right?
You and I both, we would like to see that happen, and we pray to God that, hey, yes, the church becomes the voice of authority in a lot of these matters.
Okay, I kind of went off on a tangent there for a little bit, but I can't help it. Sometimes my soapbox comes up and I jump on it.
No problem.
I just want to go back to Alton and this situation now. So my point being, Alton being a known street guy is probably the safest way that I can say it. He was a street guy with a bit of street form, and the police were fully aware of that. He was known to carry a weapon. It wasn't something that anybody was shocked or surprised about. It was something that they already knew that was in his history, right? And when you are roughing up a street guy, right, who is used to having to fight for every inch of his life, he's not going to go down without a fight, right?
Yeah, so just a matter of correction. We don't know for a fact that Alton was known to carry weapons. Unfortunately, just this particular incident, it was advised by witnesses on the ground that Alton had shown this particular homeless person a yielded gun. As a matter of fact, in eyewitness statements, especially NBC picked it up by the store owner, an eyewitness. He says Sterling never yielded a gun or threatened the officers. And he said that, he believes in the case, he said he doesn't believe that Alton had a gun, and if it was proven differently, I just, there's a lot of gray area there that is still gray today.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that over the years. So it's not anything that we're surprised about, that, things can be planted. They often are. Irrespective of anything else.
That's correct.
We had a recent issue even with, I think it was with Donna Hayes and her son. We've had several issues like that where a gun has turned up later on that's been found either in a bush but it was never in the person's hand at the time that they were shot, and you still can't understand how an individual lays dead on the floor. But my point being that if Alton was a known felon, so to speak, because he had form. He'd been to prison. He wasn't an angel. He was
right.
If he felt that he was being treated unfairly, he wasn't going to go quietly, was he?
You know what? I don't think so. But, I want to raise that point because he wasn't given the opportunity, right, with the approach. And I'm not disputing or doubting the way that there's a lot of question marks still. But I can say that the way that Sterling was detained by the Baton Rouge Police Department officers, he wasn't even given a chance to respond accordingly, because right from the start, it became a matter of aggression, and he was thrown up against the car and that sort of thing. So, I just don't think that there was a lot of time, or there was even a point. And even in a lot of times, let me say this, Kervin, the police officers who are trained, when you have a felon with a gun, they should not be rushing in like cowboys to go after that person. They should cordon off that area until backup arrives. They should get on the intercom and say, do you have a weapon? If you do, put it down. This is what we've seen time and time again. I am not a police official. I am not trained in police tactics. I am a criminal justice specialist, and we've seen consistencies of what went wrong in this case. And I can tell you that we believe that they did not follow their departmental protocols at all. And
funny you should say that, because that's exactly the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to make was not that whether Alton responded rightly or wrongly. The point I'm trying to make is, if you know that you've got a known felon, if you know that you've got somebody that's got form, if you know that you've got somebody who's been to prison before, who knows the ropes, there's a certain way that you would expect to handle them slightly different. And in a case like this, if you believe that this person has a gun because that's what's been reported, and that person was foolish enough to wave that gun in public to the extent where somebody was going to go and call 911 and inform of that, then your protocol would have asked you to make sure that those around the scene were safe first. Right? Because anything could have happened. If he had reached for his gun as they rushed him, the gun could have gone off, hitting several passers-by even. So for me, what the point I'm trying to make is, right, when I say, right, that he should have handled him differently, he was never going to go quietly. I'm a street guy, right? I know what I'm like. And if I haven't done anything wrong and police rush me, I'm going to be wanting to try to get my words out. I'm going to want to be trying to get my hand out of their grip, because I know what they're trying to do. They're going to just arrest me, handcuff me, and anything can happen. And plus, when you're already aware of the amount of innocent young black men that are shot, killed, dead, right? You're in a panic, because you don't know what these guys are going to do to you or with you. So you're going to want to try and get your voice out. You want to try and get out of their grip so you can say, hey, what's going on, man? What's going? But the point being is, if they haven't given him the chance to do that, right, because they've just rushed in at him, then that's a situation that was a death trap waiting to happen. Whether it was him that was going to lose his life or somebody else was going to lose their life, that was always going to be an eventuality, right?
Of course, whether it was him or even the officers, why would you try to tase, which is what they did, tase a person who you knew from the 911 dispatch told you that this person had a gun? Why would you even approach that person? Why wouldn't you cordon off the area, make it a safe area, get on the intercom, get on the speakerphone and say, hey, do you have a gun? If you do, we need you to drop all weapons. And we've seen this happen before, and you would think that would be common sense, but apparently this is not what happened.
I mean, when we go back, and I can't help but relate this to the John Crawford, the third case, because it's so similar in that respect, because they were given a 911 call, and if you remember correctly, when the police arrived on the scene, within 3.2 seconds or whatever it was, John Crawford the third lay dead on the floor. And I'm sure you was on that show with John Crawford's father, wasn't you? Did I not have you on the same show with him?
Sure, I advised. I worked with the Crawford case as well, and I'm the one who actually brought him to the show. John's case was a very unfortunate case, but yes, there's striking similarities in between that case and Curvin. Think about Tamir Rice's case as well.
Absolutely.
Where the officers rushed in like cowboys, and apparently to a caller with a man with a gun. Same type of situation, and unfortunately Tamir wasn't even given a chance to respond because he had a BB gun. He was a child in the park playing with a toy gun, and someone said that it was a grown man with a gun. If the officers had issued restraint and approached the situation differently, I can say Tamir would be alive today, John Crawford would be alive, and most likely Alton Sterling probably would be alive.
I mean, I look at the John Crawford the third case, and I think to myself, you've had a phone call telling you that a man is waving a gun in a store that's been visited by several shoppers who are buying all at the same time. In the midst of that call, the caller then suggests that he's now waving the gun and pointing the gun at passers-by that are passing the shopping lane, the mother and the child, for example, right? So my concern back then was that when the police arrived on the scene, they didn't go and check with the store manager, the tiller, any other members of staff, to ascertain whether or not there has been some form of a threat, some form of aggression? Have they witnessed anything? Could they identify which lane this individual might be in? Can we get all the other shoppers out of the way as quietly as we can, just to make sure that there is no further injury or incident or anybody that might be harmed or accidentally? And then maybe with a loud megaphone or something, you announce to the guy that's in there that you're the police and you're about to come in. You need them to put the weapon down, put their hands up, and all of this kind of stuff that I believe is normally standard training, right? So I can't understand why you're going to come to Baton Rouge to a guy who's got, and don't forget, for me, Alton Sterling is slightly different to John Crawford, because John Crawford had no past history. In fact, he was just on the phone to his girlfriend. But Alton Sterling has got history. So you'd want to make sure that this guy ain't hot-headed enough, right, to just want to take people out of his anger. Right, so I would imagine that you'd want to secure the scene first. You'd want to phone the store, right? For example, you've arrived. There's no immediate threat of danger. The guy who the gun was shown to has now left and called 911. Right? It's not that this guy is waving a gun at everybody and anybody. He just waved it at him. Right? That police have no other evidence contrary to that. So on your way there, you get your base, your desk sergeant, whatever it is. They contact the shop. We've just been called on a 911 call. Our officers are on the way or en route. Can you confirm that this guy is still there? And tell us what the situation is. Is he still being aggressive? Is he being confrontational? Is he approaching people? So that you can get an understanding as to what the scene is as your guys are approaching, so you can best feed that information onto your guys that are en route. Right, this guy is still volatile, he's still aggressive, he's still waving his gun, or this guy is there, we need to go and ask him a few questions, but there is no imminent threat.
So Kervin, this is what we want the people to know. Now, here's going back into the scene. This is at 12:35 a.m. Remember, so 12:35 a.m. There are not a lot of people around, and I wasn't there, but I can vouch to say that ideally 12:35 a.m. you wouldn't see the same amount of people that you would see probably maybe in midday afternoon. Okay, so think about that. So this is a small country store, and it's a single standing store in the middle of a big open lot. And the Triple S is very well lit. They have very well lighted. They have LEDs around the trim of the store. If I am standing maybe 20 to 30, 40, 50 yards back, I can see Alton Sterling sitting on with a display sitting there. So, you literally, when you pull up, you can pretty much see what's going on. So it's not a level of concealment. It's nothing. There's nobody being held hostage, So these are the types of things we can pretty much say from even our research and looking at the videos that we believe that this incident could have been avoided. And we believe that, and we can say that this black man was gunned down and his life could have been spared if the approach was different.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I'm really trying to make clear here before we move into the next phase of this particular story, which is the investigation. I just wanted to really paint a picture so that our audience can see all the ramifications of all the decision-making processes that took place and the alternative choices that could have taken place, that could have probably still had this guy living and breathing, even if he had to face consequences for waving a gun lawfully or unlawfully or whatever those charges might have been. But it would have been doing it from a position of justice rather than, everybody preempting what they think might have happened, could have happened, that never happened. And now he's decharacterized and he's not even alive to be able to tell us what his thoughts were at that moment when he was either annoyed, frustrated, or angry. So we have some real unanswered questions here, and the police have taken away the opportunity for us to find out what those answers could be just by the sheer motive, agenda, and process in which they actually actioned his death. It was almost like an execution. Now, as an advocate and a public speaker, you must have seen some pretty irate individuals at various protests and meetings when people were starting to ask questions as in the community as to how this happened, how it was allowed to happen. What was the most outstanding questions for you in the preliminary stages of the aftermath?
Well, going back to, and yes, around the country, anytime that we see the killing of a young African American male, or not even just African American, minority, oppressed, I like to say, because it's not just happening in the Black community, but it's happening in other communities as well. But predominantly, it's happening. A lot of these are happening in the Black community. You are seeing overnight, a flurry of outrage. In Baton Rouge, within minutes, over 100 demonstrators were on the ground shouting, "No justice, no peace." And the fireworks lasted for days. People were protesting. There was one incident during the protest where someone knocked the teeth out of a police officer because of the level of frustration. I mean, surprisingly, we didn't see another police brutality murder from that incident. But what I'm saying to you is that, around the country, not even just around the country, but I need you to know, and we should talk about how anytime that there's a police killing of an African-American male in America, like say, for instance, the Bahamian government internationally issued a travel advisory. Citizens were told to use caution when they come to the U.S. due to racial tensions. And not only were the Bahamians, but the United Arab Emirates issued a travel warning when approaching U.S. police officers. So what I'm saying is these incidents are going around the world internationally, and it's making our police apparatus look extremely bad in the eyes of the world.
And the funny thing is, do you think that the police are acknowledging just how badly they're being visualized across the world?
I don't think that they really have a sense of that. I think that they really think on a local municipality level, and I really think that they need to start thinking more on a global level how America looks with these incidents, because if they thought about that, then there's a lot of danger into that, because even with the police military industrial complex, if it's viewed that America is brutal, how do you think that they will react when fighting opposing forces? How do you think that, what would happen during a questionable incident that leads to a war? Because the people already say that there's a stigma with the United States. We want to avoid that because of the stigma that's associated with that, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Do you think that there's an arrogance around America as a whole, or around the American law enforcement agencies, as to, well, we don't care, this is what we do and this is how we're going to do it?
There is a neoconservative, not just a conservative, but a neoconservative level of approach in our country that exists right now, even under this administration, to whereas they are not only cynical, but I mean, they are motivated. It seems by many of us who are outside of those circles, they're motivated by prejudice. I don't understand it, but it almost is a throwback to what we've seen with Jim Crow and what we've seen over the course of the last century. And, these people, if they had their way, this would be 1950 or 1940 or 1930, where Jim Crow was the ruling law of the land. And that is what we're seeing right now.
387 people have been killed by police in 2018 to date. That's the latest figure from the Washington Post. We haven't had that many troops killed in Iraq, in Syria, or any of the other wars that I know of. Is it not time for them to start looking at this war they have with the community? Because that's what it appears to be. It appears to be a war that they have with the ethnic minorities in the United States of America, that many people can be killed and it was 900 and something odd last year. We don't have that many killed in a war. How do they justify this?
So let me ask you this question, Kervin, because here's the thing. You being primarily from the UK, even though a lot of us feel like you're a dual citizen because you know more about the States and what's going on here and just being here than a lot of even American citizens. But let me ask you this. Adding to that, the United States is far from recognizing the rights of its citizens. But how does it look from people? How does the United States policing apparatus look to people when discussing your community? I would ask that you would answer that, because we need to hear that. The United States, the locals here need to hear how the world views these things.
You know,
if you understand what I mean.
We are absolutely shocked and appalled. And in common conversations that I might have in the workplace, in the gym, or anywhere else I'm at, people are just absolutely gobsmacked and dumbfounded that it's as it is and unchallenged as it is. And most people say, well, that's America for you. I mean, it's almost as if it's become an acceptable standard of your legislation. Now, we had similar issues here in the UK. You've met with my dear friend Satish, who's worked tirelessly in the miscarriages of justice here in the UK. But, you know, we might have issues with gangs on streets and stuff like that, but we don't have police killing unarmed black individuals on the streets of the UK anymore, because we put legislation into position that stops them from doing that. Now they are more accountable. I believe here in this country, when an officer is involved in a shooting, he is stood down for a period of time, and there is a full investigation, not by the police, by an outside body. That officer is accountable for life. Officers need to be accountable for lives. And what we see is a total lack of respect for lives out in America. And we almost think that, well, hey guys, this is what you guys like. This is what you must want. This is what you live in. How do you tolerate it? Because we couldn't. We wouldn't.
Exactly.
We just wouldn't. They would be, you know, some people don't realize this, but we had our race riots back in the 60s. We had them again in the 80s, and blood was shed. Police officers were turned upside down in boiling fat of hot dog stall runners, etc. And I was involved in several back in those days. You know, and we didn't stand for this injustice. And we still have this mentality where if a police tries to approach us and we haven't done anything wrong, well, that's why I said about Alton being with form and street cred, etc. He's not just going to go down easy. I would still find it difficult to just throw up my arms and surrender if I believed that a police was going to harm me and I hadn't done anything wrong. I still, even as a God-fearing Christian, I think I would find it difficult. I'm not saying that I wouldn't. I'm saying I still think I would find it difficult to just throw my arms up and allow them to rough me up, arrest me, and do with me as they will if I haven't done anything wrong. So imagine somebody who's not a Christian. Imagine somebody who's not a faith-moving person. Imagine somebody who lives by the streets rules and the streets laws, because that's how they live, and they don't think that they've done anything wrong, and you're going to come up into their face and into their space and try and disrespect them. Do you think that it's going to go down well? Do you think it's going to go down easy? The police need to find a different approach, because the approach that they are using doesn't work.
America, Kervin, and I appreciate that, and I totally agree with you 100% indeed. America must confront the pain of its racist history once and for all, as we are entering into a new world in a new day and age, and citizens are globalized now. We know what's going on in the UK because of the internet. We know what's going on in Iran. We know what's going on in North Korea. We can talk to people from these communities. We couldn't do that 25 years ago, right? We couldn't do it 20 years ago. We wouldn't be able to have those resources, but we can do it instantly now. So what I'm saying, as the world becomes more globalized, if America does not confront its racist history, then what's going to happen is we are going to continue sinking in the eyes of the world, and we will lose status and positioning in the eyes of the world. And when that happens, which is happening as we speak, then that becomes dangerous for America.
Absolutely, because that's the changes that the UK made to ensure that that wouldn't happen. Our basic human rights in this country are probably better than anywhere else in the world because of that. You can't go in the workplace and call anybody out by their name. You can't call them no racist name without going to jail or without going to court. It's now against the law. Racial harassment is against the law. You cannot call anybody the N-word. You cannot use those kind of terminologies on the street. If you'd said that to me out on the street, I can call the police right now and I can have you arrested for racial harassment. You could lose your job or you can go to jail. There are consequences for anti-racial behavior, right? Anti-communal behavior, anti-social behavior. There are consequences. And for me, what I'm not seeing out there in America is there are not enough consequences. But hey, we got an additional problem because while black folk continue to call fellow black folk the N-word, they're giving the white man an opportunity to stand and do what they do, right? When Kanye West turns around and says that black people in slavery 400 years ago was a choice, he's going to get a #1 hit when he releases his next record from the white man because they like that kind of thing, right? There are still places where you can go where as long as you don't talk about the black thing, you're okay as a black man amongst white folk. Just don't mention the black thing. They don't want to hear about the black thing. They don't want to be reminded about the black thing. You can be a real good black fellow, right, if you don't mention the black thing. We can accept you. You're tolerable if you don't mention the black thing. But the moment you mention the black thing, the slavery, the injustice, the unfairness of it all, right, all of a sudden we become a problem. But in respect, some of the time we're also creating that problem for ourselves by the way we treat one another in the eyes of these people, for the sake of these people. So for me, we got to start cleaning up our own backyard too, if we want them to respect us.
That is so correct, Kervin. And we cannot supersede. A part of the problem has been internal responsibility in between the community, the folks in the community. Black on black violence, is a factor that we cannot supersede, and we really have to think about that. And a lot of these cases, I just want to add, and we're not condoning anyone's murder, but even in a lot of these cases, Ferguson, when it came to young Mike Brown, there was instances to whereas Mike Brown was truant from school. He had a truancy record from school. He had dropped out of high school. There were indications that when things are going bad, we have to reel our children back in and say, hey, buddy, hey, young lady, what you're doing is going to lead you down the wrong path. And what I'm saying is that has to be institutionalized and it has to be implemented in the communities. And like we always say, you have to think about things from a community standpoint, like going back into some of the earlier periods, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. If a child was walking down the street in a community and the community did something wrong in that community, instantly the neighbors would be on that child, the teachers would be on that child. We don't see the same ethic. And I'm saying that has to come back.
Absolutely. There is a community responsibility to raise the children. It's not just down to the parents, it's a community. When the community turns a blind eye to a local individual who is stealing, robbing, selling drugs or prostituting women, when communities turn their backs, turn a blind eye to all sorts of criminal activities on their street corners and stuff, they are saying that they are okay with it. That's fine. Then you can't jump and scream when the police come into the community. I want to bring a shutdown on this thing, right? We have a community responsibility to not just our children, but to our neighbors' children, because our neighbors' children behavior is going to impact our children, right? If it doesn't impact our children, it's going to impact us. We have a community responsibility, and it's not supposed to be left to the government. It's not supposed to be left to the police. It's down to us to start policing our own communities to make sure that the police don't actually have as much of a reason to come into it and do what they do.
Well, ultimately, some of these disturbing questions will be answered by the internal police affairs investigators. You know, some of these questions have to be answered by government officials and civic leaders. We agree to that, right? Other questions, the deeper ones, the subliminal ones that we ask about equality and intolerance must be answered within our classrooms, Kervin. It has to be answered in our courtrooms. These questions have to go out from our living rooms. You know, the very existence attests that we as a nation have failed our Trayvon Martins. We failed our Mike Browns. We failed our Tamir Rices. We failed these young men. And we can't put it all on the individual family. We can take equal credit for failing as a community.
Absolutely. And the heart-rendering, the heart-breaking issue here, Greg, is there are more Tamir Rices, there are more John Crawford III's, there are more Alton Sterlings to come unless we can start getting this right today. We're kind of 7:15 now, my time. I'm trying to work out what time it is your time, but you know, we've got about 45 minutes left. I want to try and see if we can move on to the investigation of the officers that were involved in Alton's shooting, and let's just have a look at how that was investigated and what are our findings on that. Can you take us through what you know of the investigation as such?
Okay, so I'm going to give you from the public information, and then I want to share a little bit of insider information as well from subjectively, okay? So what happened during the investigation, instantly during Alton's death, the governor of Louisiana, Democratic governor John Bell, announced the next day after Alton's death that the Department of Justice would announce and launch an immediate investigation, which was, to me, to be honest with you, Kervin, was very unusual, because normally a lot of times the investigations with a local shooting, be it even if it's a police homicide, is investigated by the local municipality first, right? And if they can't do anything with it, then it goes up to the federal government, right? But the governor instantly sent this up to the DOJ. We don't know. Well, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this to this part. This is where I believe, in my subjective opinion, this is my opinion, I believe that the governor wanted to get this thing off of his lap as soon as possible, because what he wanted to do, Kervin, was he wanted to, number one, he wanted to quell any public discontent and say, hey, I am doing something because I just sent this to the federal government, which was the wrong answer. Even at that point in time, because that was the Justice Department under Obama, but again, still failing. So Governor John Edwards sent the investigation, and they announced an investigation. It took a year, okay? So a year with the United States Department of Justice, their investigation, that on July 7th of 2016, just a year and 2 days, Kervin. Subsequently, the department announced that it would not bring charges against the officers involved. So I can pause there if you want, or I can continue.
No,
but
please,
do you see how?
Yeah, please continue. Just continue.
Okay, so do you see how that maybe possibly there was a subjective opinion that maybe it wasn't handled right from the beginning? And that's what we see consistently in a lot of these cases. So after the Department of Justice announced that it would not charge the two officers, then the Louisiana Attorney General at this point in time, Jeff Landry, Landry, Jeff Landry, announced that the state of Louisiana would bring an investigation. So Jeff Landry, the head lawyer, head attorney in the state, said they would begin their investigation. And in a statement, Landry wrote that basically the matter does need to be investigated for possible state criminal violations. So now they're looking to see if any federal statewide statutes were violated. Well, do you remember what we said? Well, we said consistently that murder is a homicide and murder is always a federal crime, right?
Yeah.
So why would the state say we're looking for state criminal violations? Okay, so for me, this is, again, it's another misnomer. It's maybe a window dressing to say, hey, it looks like we're doing something in the case of Alton Sterling. So on March 18th, mid-March of 2018, I don't know if it was March 18th, but it was March of this year.
It was March the 30th. March the 30th.
Okay, March the 30th. Laundrie announced that they would not bring charges against the officers, stating that the officers acted in a reasonable and justifiable manner. With that in mind, like you said, on March 30th, Officer Salamoni was fired for violating the use of force policies. Yeah. Now, why would that announcement come after the investigation was disclosed? Had that have come before, had Salamoni been fired for violating the use of force policies, would that not have interfered or put into effect the cause and say that these officers committed a potential homicide, if you understand what I mean?
Absolutely, but here's what we don't have clarification of. At what point had they concluded that Salamoni had violated the use of forces? They tell us the date that he was fired, but what was the date that they concluded that he had violated the use of force policies? Because that to me...
Well, we do. We have clarification. Well, I'm giving you clarification. It was after the Attorney General closed out the case through the state. So basically, these officers could not at any point be charged for homicide, neither statewide or federal-wide, because it was already closed. And that is exactly within days when the department itself said that they were firing Salamoni for violating use of force policies.
Did they elaborate on what the force policies that he violated were?
What we know, the family, it was a private meeting with the attorneys and the family. The community was not involved, but what was told through media reports and through reports, and I did get a firsthand account from a family member, was that because the officer said that I am going to shoot you in the fucking head, is right. What he said to Alton.
So there you have the immediate show of aggression, anger, intent to kill, and a sheer disrespect and disregard for the individual, right there in that statement.
Okay, in the quote, I'm sorry. Let me requote this right, because I have to. When the officers were wrestling Alton on the ground, the officers repeatedly asked Alton to stop resisting. Alton said, "You have my arm, my arm, my arm." And then Salamoni said, "If you move, I will shoot you in the fucking head if you continue to." This is what he said. What's the quote? But go ahead.
So, I don't know. Have you ever been arrested before yourself?
Yes, I have. Okay. Yes, I have.
So have I on many occasions in my past life.
Both cases were dismissed in my case, but go ahead.
And when the police are forcibly arresting you in an aggressive manner, it hurts. Your arms hurt, your elbows hurt. Sometimes they're pinning you to the ground and your shoulder blade is digging into the concrete, or your elbow is digging into the concrete, or they have your arm in such a position that the way that they position it, you just feel like it's about to tear off at the joint, right? And so I can imagine, an individual who's been roughed up with no regard for his well-being whatsoever, right? Who's moving around because he's in absolute agony, and he's not moving around because he doesn't want to be arrested. He's moving around because the position he's in is too uncomfortable. right? He cannot physically stay in that position because the pain is tremendous. And when you imagine that you've got weights on top of you, people sitting on your body or their knee in your back, and all of that kind of thing, and you've got limited movement, and you're in that kind of pain, it's going to be a very awkward thing. So the whole approach situation to dealing with an incident like that is where the reform and the re-education needs to be going in. De-escalation, as we've talked about from the top of the show, needs to be a real area of improvement and retraining for law enforcement officers to be able to de-escalate, sometimes from a distance, to be able to talk someone down, to be able to get an understanding of what that person's mindset is. Do they sound coherent? Are they under the influence of anything? Do they understand clearly what I'm saying to them and what the consequences might be if they don't respond appropriately to the instructions that I'm about to give them? I mean, these are things that you expect a law enforcement officer who has your life in his hands to be well trained in. Why haven't we got officers trained to that level, Greg?
And here's what we need to also say. Yes, to your question is it should be the factor in their approach, but both officers, Howie Lake and Blaine Salamone, Lake had 3 years of law enforcement experience, so he was no rookie. Okay, Salamone had 4. Lake was already subsequently placed upon a department mandated leave on a previous incident, which involved the shooting of an African-American male. You understand? So Salamone and Lake both had been previously investigated and cleared by the department for already using other incidents of excessive force. How many times have we seen this? This is the same ethic that happened in Tamir's case, whereas these officers had other incidents in their file. And at a certain point, if we're seeing a consistency, then you have to redirect these officers. You have to take them off the streets. Maybe they need to do administrative duty for a year, like you said, that they maybe something, an extended period like they do in the UK, but get them off the streets because what they are is virtually they're killing machines.
Absolutely, and the bottom line is they're going to continue to kill until somebody puts a stop to them. But the fact that Salamone was fired after they closed the investigation suggests that the local authority was deliberately trying to hide the evidence and the information of the investigation that they had on the officers and their findings. Now, how accessible are the findings of the authorities' investigation into Salamone, for example, that might help?
Well, some information has been made known through media and that sort of thing. But here's the thing. The reason why we don't see the gamut of it, the information, is because there is still a pending lawsuit against the city of Baton Rouge. There is still pending litigation, and that is going forward as we speak. Obviously, for those who don't know, the officers cannot be indicted in this lifetime or the next for murder or homicide. It's gone. The statute of limitations is over, neither state nor federal, but basically the lawsuit and the civil litigation will go, and the city probably will end up settling with the family.
But no criminal charges can ever be made, and the consequence for which they should be subjected to, they will never witness.
Unless through attrition and maybe some kind of international tribunal, if there was something that exists of that nature, then maybe. But at this point in time, unfortunately, there is nothing on the international level of human rights that will prosecute public officials for acting outside the interest of the community, unfortunately.
Talking about human rights, Greg, how many areas of our human rights do you think was infringed in the way that Alton Sterling was treated?
Well, We know that his constitutional rights were violated because his First Amendment rights were violated in the approach. I mean, you can just go down the line and say that throughout this whole investigation from the beginning, to me, it was subsequently fumbled. Not just from the local police, but even from the government officials, from the governor's office, all the way down to the subsequent investigation by the attorney general. I mean, you can say that, the timing, and we can definitely say that the timing was very suspect, that Salamone was fired after the investigation of the state was closed. Well, didn't you have enough information to do that firing while the investigation was pending? Didn't you have enough investigation to know that you had the information? So why would you wait till after? So we would really say that this was a railroaded case, and this young man's constitutional rights were violated all the way through.
So going forward, Greg, we need to start talking about what the community, what organizations like yourself are going to be doing to protect those human rights, those basic rights, those civil rights of individuals. What's the steps going forward, Greg?
Well, two things. We are working now. This is one of the things that I wanted to say. Freedom First International, along with several other organizations, is announcing that we are working on a level of public subjugation. And what subjugation is when the police officials won't do the right thing in the community, or the officials in general, public officials, I should say, then what they will be doing is they will be censored through a community effort, and the community will know who these people are, and there's a file that will go with these people throughout subsequently from this point on, and it will be an ongoing file. So if anyone ever wanted to research that file, then they would know about this person, who he is. Say, for instance, if this person were to try to go through another police department or another police agency or maybe another governmental agency, basically this file would be available through public sanction to say that this person acted outside of public interest. That is what we're working on. That is a initiative that we've been putting together over the course of the last year, and we're hoping that this initiative will roll out within the next 6 months. So that's one thing.
Okay, just looking at that particular area for 1 minute, right? So Salamone was fired by the Louisiana State Police, right, for violating their force policies, right? But he could be hired by another state.
Maybe not in the state, but we've seen instances. It depends upon if the local state or state agency does the adequate background check. But he can go outside of the state. If they only do a statewide background check, then basically if the agency only does a state check, then there's a chance that he can go to another state and get hired. There's a chance that he can go maybe to a civic force, like a university police agency, definitely, who wouldn't have those tools and resources, and get hired on their police force. So there are ways we've seen it happen, and that is exactly what happened in Tamir's case. The officer left one jurisdiction. He had an incident of police brutality, and he was fired. And he was hired on to Cleveland Police Department, and this is the same officer, the young man who subsequently killed Tamir. He had a major file on him, but the Cleveland did not do the right thing and investigate the file. So we've seen these cases happen, yes.
So there's one area that is in an absolute turmoil, because if you've got an officer that can be fired for violating force policies, which resulted in the death of an individual, then he should be unemployable in that particular field. He should have to go and find a job doing something else totally different. But yet, he can still be licensed to carry a lethal weapon and police the streets or a communal area, right? and have someone else's life in their hands. And yet they haven't fixed the problem, which is his mental attitude and approach to doing the job.
It should be mandated on a federal level, especially because there was even though they were cleared from a homicide investigation, the fact of the matter is they went through a homicide investigation. That should be duly notated. And basically, you know what, that person, if he was terminated, shouldn't be allowed to work in another law enforcement agency if the law enforcement agency did their thing. But again, we've seen cases to where that hasn't happened. And unfortunately, in Tamir's case, his life was ended because the city did not do what they were supposed to do.
And we have seen, I mean, you've mentioned it with Tamir, but we have seen several other areas where officers who have taken the lives of individuals and have been found wanting in one area or another, not to the extent where they've been prosecuted for murder, but they've been found wanting by the department, fired, dismissed, benched, and yet they've resurfaced somewhere else doing a very similar job. Is that right?
That is correct.
So the battle has got to be to change the protocol and the system, the database, because one of the things that you guys have out there in America is the fact that it's almost like each different state is almost like a different country. They're all governed differently by different governors with different rules, and not the same rule applies across the board. That's got to be a major stumbling block to get a nation, a whole country, operating on the same playing field.
So, Kervin, think about it like this. There is a database, there's a national database for felony offenses and major offenses in America, to whereas if you are an offender, basically any jurisdiction can pull up your record. Well, why couldn't that type of database exist for public officials who violate the law or act outside of public interest? You can arrest us, you can be hurried up and to arrest us, but when the shoe is on the other foot, we don't see the same level of interaction and accountability in it. Yes, it should be there.
And the bottom line is they actually have the template to do it, because if the database exists to manage felons, then that database could just be adapted to include anything or anyone else from any area.
Sure.
So why do you think it is the government haven't yet made steps to unify this type of database?
Well, one of the things that you must know is that, number one, the police officials are guarded, like you said, by each individual state has the policy. But then you have to think about municipalities. So it trickles down to a municipal level. So in a state, from city to city and township to township, maybe county to county, each one of these departments operates on subsequent different policies and procedures. So even in, like, say, for instance, remember we talked about Joliet, where when we were investigating Samaje's case, you had the state officials, you had the township police. So you have in one jurisdiction, you have 2 or 3 police agencies, and they operate differently. And that's why that baby's murder has not been resolved. So this is the problem. Municipalities all operating, there is not a cohesive database. That is the number one problem.
One of the other things.
Go ahead. No, proceed.
Yeah, one of the other things that springs to mind in cases like this, I had Jonathan Newton from the National.
Yes, he's a friend of mine.
Okay, I had John Newton on the show just a couple of weeks ago, and we were looking at this issue surrounding qualified immunity.
Yes.
And when he explained that to me, I thought, how ironic. So, and qualified immunity means that if the officer says that he didn't know what law he was breaking when he was breaking it, then that frees him of any charge that could be made against him in connection to the death of an individual, so to speak. If I've got that kind of right.
Yes. Well, that is a factor that if and the other thing with outside of qualified immunity is that if the officer feels threatened at any point, if he says that even if he committed a murder and it was obsessive, and there was every reason to believe it was excessive and a miscarriage of justice from the public standpoint, if that officer says, I feared for my life, if he says those magic words, 99% of the time, 90% of the time, he'll be exonerated because he said, I feared for my life.
And that's the get out of jail clause, right? So we've had this conversation on so many occasions with yourself. I've had it with various other representatives who have come on the show. This I feared for my life scenario. Now, I once asked a former chief of police this question, and I'm gonna have to ask it again, because we have statistics that say over 387 individuals have been killed by cops this year. 980 odd was killed last year. In fact, I actually think it was twice that much. But you know, I know that there's some of the stats that they don't include in that for various reasons. But almost 100% of those kills are by male officers. But you have female officers that are gun carrying officers who are also responding to volatile situations. And I just can't get my head round how come we don't have female officers unloading their weapons and screaming, I was in fear of my life. Because if anybody should be in fear of their life when they're coming across some manic, aggressive, violent male individual, it should be the females, not the males. These males, if they are in total fear for their life, then they need to go and get a job doing something else, like a traffic warden or a refuge collector, or a sales assistant and stocking shelves in Tesco or something. Because this comes with part of the territory. You're a trained officer. And part of that training is you will encounter aggressive and violent individuals. I don't get how this I was in fear of my life mentality has been allowed to breed in what is called the second line to the army. You imagine, right, if you're in the middle of a war and there's a ceasefire and there's about 15 kids running across, and all of a sudden one of the soldiers opens fire with his machine gun or his tank or whatever and says that I was in fear of my life. I mean, imagine the depths of prosecutions that would take place on that particular soldier, because he's supposed to be trained to take orders, to wait for the order. We were talking about another incident with one of the other mothers just a couple of weeks ago, where they arrived to a scene and there was 70. In fact, I'm sure it was a Donna Hayes case. 17 officers arrived. 16 officers were called. The 17th officer, now hear this, I'm not sure if you're aware of this case. 16 officers responded with their firearms. The 17th officer, the one that fired the fatal shots that killed the individual, right, was not requested by the force. His wife was a 911 receptionist and took the call. She then called him and told him that there was an incident taking place. He then equipped himself with his arms and made his way there. He wasn't invited to the party. Out of the 17 officers that surrounded the individual, he was the only one who fired a shot, claiming that the man was reaching for his gun. Right? My question then was, what did the other 16 officers think? Why wasn't there a single shot fired by any of the other 16 officers if this man was reaching for his gun as the 17th officer claimed he was?
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that particular case, but think about another case that we know, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Laquan McDonald case out of Chicago.
Absolutely, yes. We did the Laquan McDonald case.
Okay, so this is an officer, one single officer with multiple officers around who is running after a fleeing felon. Now, the fleeing felon, Laquan, young man, was no angel, right? Same thing as Alton, was no angel. But, when this gentleman was running from an alleged car break-in, running from the police, ran down the highway in the middle of the highway, he was stopped by Officer Jason Van Dyke. Multiple officers was around, but Jason Van Dyke was the one who loaded 16 shots in taking this young man's life. Now, I never have understood how 16 shots, when these officers are trained that one shot will dismember someone if you shoot him in the right place, shoot him in their leg, that will take that person down. And I can guarantee you there won't be a lot of resistance if they got a bullet in their leg. Yeah. But 16 shots, and here's the thing, Kervin, that we all need to discuss. The officer, Van Dyke, asked his fellow officer, with several officers were around, he asked the next officer to him for his gun to reload. So the second officer said no. Van Dyke would have put several more shots or more into Laquan McDonald if the officer would have given his firearm. So what I'm saying to you, yes, it is a problem. American policing has to change. And if it doesn't change, we will receive the disdain of the world. And that does not just affect local municipalities or communities. That affects us on a global level.
Absolutely.
The ramifications are huge.
There are several organizations who are talking about handling reform, tackling reform, discussing reform. How is the reform taking place? What's it looking like? What format is it shaping into? Where are the conversations taking place? And who do you think is likely to be the front runners when it comes to sitting around a table talking about police reform?
Well, I'm glad that you asked about sitting around the table, because I don't know if you were aware, but I actually am a member of the United Nations, and I took Tamir Rice's mother, Samaria, John Crawford, to the United Nations. We organized a date, and we brought Harry Belafonte, who was a well-known civil rights leader around the world. I also brought Alicia Garza from Black Lives Matters down to the UN on this particular event. And this is, we have to start pushing internationally on the American government and government bodies, not just America, who act outside, when they act outside of public interest and they act against their citizenry, the international push is very much needed. So that's one point. Okay. The other point is that federally, like you had hinted on and you had mentioned, I believe, moments ago, is that there needs to be federal legislation that takes these things out of hands of local municipalities, because what you have locally, especially some of these one-cart, one-horse towns, is you have officers, when they act out of line, it doesn't even have to be a police fatality. It could be police, manipulation of records, excessive force, things of that nature. Well, what you have is you have officers who investigate officers, because it goes to an administration of their friends, and they investigate each other. And 99% of the time, I mean, if I'm investigating a buddy of mine, I'm going to let that guy go easy. You hear me? And that's what we're seeing. Officers are investigating. And Jonathan Newman, who used to be a police officer and he's now an attorney, will tell you that. Alex Salazar will tell you that these things exist. And when you have officers investigating officers, it has to end. So it has to be a federal body that is put together to look at these cases and investigate them and recommend the appropriate solution.
Absolutely. Now, here's another factor. The United States of America, right, is always one of the front runners, right, for putting sanctions on countries that are treating their residents in an inappropriate way that breaches their human rights. So, where is the outcry? Where is the outrage? Where is the movement for getting countries internationally, worldwide, to start sanctioning America for their human rights breaches against its own people, especially in cases of law enforcement? Is there not a call for a movement to get an international argument up so that you can start representing? Would that not be a way forward? Because part of how they were able to free Nelson Mandela was sanctions. Part of what they did with Gaddafi in Libya was sanctions. What they've done with trying to penalize Russia is sanctions. They've done sanctions right across the globe. Why aren't people looking at sanction in America for their breach of human rights against its own people?
Yeah, unfortunately, at this point, even though there have been small inquiries and those inquiries are ongoing, there really hasn't been an official collaborative effort that would put the authority together to eliminate the issue. Now, President Obama did put a community policing and board together to look at the issue, but unfortunately, there wasn't any resolution that came out of that board. They made suggestions and that sort of thing, but again, until they federalize the issue, when police, and more specifically for homicides, they don't have to do anything else. When police officials act outside of public interest, then there has to be a federal authority who looks at these things, investigates these things, and say, "Hey, buddy, you went too far. Guess what you did? What you did was against the federal law, and you will be prosecuted federally for this crime." There is nothing at this point, unfortunately.
That's a real shame. I mean, there's people like you that are working hard right across the board, and I know that you've up until Hillary Clinton, I remember you talking to me about that, where you went to go meet with her, and there's positive steps have been made in some areas, but have just not been able to be solidified to put it into place so that it can actually be something that's actioned.
Yeah.
So
it was on her agenda, Curvin, and I actually was a surrogate for Hillary. And to be honest with you, there were some negative things that were said about that campaign, but I believe that she would have been the greatest advocate for change when it comes to police brutality and murder. I really do. And I can guarantee you that she would have done more than this current U.S. president. I will tell you that for a fact.
I don't disagree with you one bit. In fact, I'm over here on this side of the water, and my vote wouldn't have counted. But that's where my vote would have gone had I had a vote. But I just feel as an observer from across the waters that the troubles that you guys have over there, it's heartbreaking for us over on this side, because there's very little that we can do. We over in this country, we tend to follow you. We tend to be led by America. But not as far as law is concerned. Our legislation here governs us in a different and a better way. The way that our police are trained, and you guys based your constabulary on Robert Constable. So I'm not sure why you didn't follow that through and take the whole thing instead of just part the bits and pieces that they liked and they wanted. Until we start going back to community police, where the guy that's going out onto the street is familiar with the community and the individuals and characters that run in that community, I think we're always going to have a problem with policing on the streets.
Sure. Hey, Kervin, can I ask you a question? And I need you to consider this. Have you talked to any of the officials at the United Nations?
I haven't, not yet. I'd love to have one of them on my show.
Would you like me to coordinate a show with you with officials from the United Nations based upon this conversation?
Absolutely. And you know what? I'd get Jonathan Newton, I'd get Alex Salazar, I'd get Jerry Summer, I'd have yourself. I'd have about 5 or 6 people. We can get up to about 10 people on a group call on this particular app that I've got now. So we can get up, safely 7 or 8, I'd say, to really make sure that everybody can get a real, positive contribution in. But I would suggest, yes, let's do this. I've got people sitting down in the wings waiting to say something. And the likes of Jerry Summer and Jonathan Newton and yourself are great adversaries for police reform and witnesses to what's taking place. Jerry Summer is a former chief of police, by the way. And I've had him on the show on a few occasions, and is highly representative of police reform and accountability.
Well, let's do it. I mean, let's do it because I think that the United Nations peace needs to be pronounced. And as you remember, when Dr. King died, he was trying to take the flight of civil rights to the United Nations. When Malcolm X died in his last days, he was trying to take the flight of the oppressed Black minorities to the United Nations. And I can tell you what, there can be change that happens on an international level with folks such as yourself, because you are a global citizen, by the way, if you don't know that or not. I'm telling you, you're a global citizen, by the way. So if you haven't heard it, you hear it now. But if we can get the input from United Nations specialists who do this for a living, and they would be very much able to help and provide a lot of clarification from an international and a global standpoint, how we can work together to resolve these issues.
I think that's a perfect way forward, and I'm going to look forward to you. You get me the guy, right? I'll get you the date, right? You tell me his availability, and I'll squeeze him in. And I can guarantee you, our dearest friends, especially Jerry Summer and Jonathan Newton, I definitely want to get those guys involved in that show.
I'll bring 2 or 3 of them, and I'll start working on that right away, okay?
Okay, well, listen, Greg, is there anything else before we finish that you wanted to bring across that you might not have got out yet?
Well, I do want to say this. I actually wrote an article in the Huffington Post. I'm going to reshare that with you, Kervin. And here's the thing. One of the things that you said, and I want to reiterate that to the community who's listening, or the folks who will be listening to this taping, is that, we have to be able to think about things from the standpoint of morality. And that means that every single Black person in the eyes of a racist symbolizes a terrible crime from their ugly past. And what these racists have to simply own up to the past. And yes, when Kanye West said 400 years of slavery was whatever he said, I'm scratching my head still about that statement, was a choice. Well, twisting the facts and making Black people into these ungodly creatures that they look down on and laugh at and fear is a failed attempt at peace in itself, and this must stop. So we have to think about how we can bring peace to these communities. We have to think about every last community and every last individual. And my message to the Black community, last but not least, in closing, is we need more love in our communities. We need more love and acceptance of our children unconditionally, and regardless of who they are, we've got to show them that they're valuable and worthy. And it doesn't matter if we don't agree with every choice that they made, but if we don't hold our children accountable, as an educator myself, we can stave off this emptiness. We can stop the murder of Mike Brown if we show our children that they're valuable. And that would be a powerful step towards combating what we're seeing in the death by these racists.
Greg, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for the last 2 hours. It's been a great conversation, a great discussion, and I look forward to our next meeting with the United Nations, where we take this to the next level. As for now, Greg Greer, Pastor Greg Greer, public speaker and advocate, we're out of time.
Thank you.
We'll speak again soon. God bless.
Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Roddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month.
Reggae dancehall by the beach.
At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember, you can also get VIP and shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
Use them, it's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, sound system for your wedding, birthday or special occasion, then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, dubplates and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
Sunday, May 27, 2018, GDS Entertainment proudly presents
Grooving on the Hudson.
That's right, Grooving on the Hudson Memorial Weekend Celebration. Music played by Road International, Selector Oxtail alongside King Shiloh International. All aboard the elegant Paddle Wheel Queens, One World's Fair Marina. Boarding 6 p.m. sharp from Flushing Queens Certified Shea Stadium. And Miss Marina will be selling 7 p.m. sharp. Also,
For tickets, People's Choice Furniture, Bronx, New York. Doris Restaurant, Queens, New York. G's Restaurant, Queens, New York.
Also,
WorldGymGlobal.com.
Also, complimentary dinner prize and surprises.
Come party with us.
World Jam Global Radio, this is Clarity.